After remaining largely silent on the issue for about a week and a half, Biden now set to give a speech on anti-Semitism Tuesday, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Joining us now, CNN political commentator Van Jones and Olivia Troy, a former advisor in the Trump White House. Great to see both of you. Olivia, let's start first with you. In the same week that Trump could not, again, bring himself to accept the results of a 2024 election, he's now comparing Biden and his administration to the Nazi secret police.
Well, first off, I think that comparison is completely abhorrent. I think there should be no room for that in political rhetoric. There's no comparing to what he's referring to. And I would say that, having worked in the Trump administration, the projection runs deep, because I think that when he's talking about things like that, it's sort of how he would like to run things. And he's already talked about taking revenge on his opponents. He's already talked about taking revenge against those in the media that don't follow his narratives and support him. And, it makes me wonder what happens to people like me who have become critics of him because of his damaging rhetoric. And I also think his dangerous rhetoric that's divisive for the country. And I also think the damage that he's done to the Republican brand.
Yeah, the projection runs deep. Van, we mentioned in an interview, Trump said he would not commit to accepting the results of this election. I want to let everyone listen to how a potential running mate for him, Senator Tim Scott, responded when he was pressed on the same issue. Here's what he said.
You voted to certify the election results of 2020. It's the exact opposite of what you said and did after 2020. Why would you want to be on a ticket with someone where there's such a fundamental difference?
This is an issue that is not an issue, so I'm not going to make it an issue.
Well, Senator, will you commit to accepting the election results of 2024? Bottom line.
Well, at the end of the day, the 47th president of the United States will be President Donald Trump, and I'm excited to get back to low inflation, low unemployment.
Wait, Senator, yes or no? Yes or no? Will you accept the election results of 2024 no matter who wins?
That is my statement.
Van, that's just not a hard question. But apparently it is if you want to be Trump's vice president.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Tim Scott is, I think, one of the truly great people in the Republican Party in general. He's been there on opportunity zones. He's been there on black colleges. He's been there on so many issues. And he has a history of standing up to President Trump, after Charlottesville and other things. So what you're seeing now is the surfboard beginning to deal with the wave, pushing people in a direction that makes no sense. Obviously, you shouldn't even run for office if you're not going to accept the results of it. But that shows you how far down the rabbit hole the Republican Party has been drugged by Donald Trump's refusal to face reality. And anybody who wants to be associated with Donald Trump has to bend to that reality. I know Tim Scott. I know he's got a better head on his shoulders than he showed in that interview.
And Olivia, it's interesting because, look, you have Vice President Mike Pence, who did everything he was supposed to do to show his loyalty to Donald Trump, except break the law, right? He was going to certify the election results. And that put him in danger when the Secret Service had to run him out of the Capitol on January 6th. Why do you think these VP candidates think that they could get a different outcome here if they're just perfect enough?
I think it comes down to political cravenness for power, and it won't be a different outcome. I think that we have seen this for all of Trump's inner circle and those that have worked closely with him, especially in the example of former Vice President Mike Pence. And so I think the litmus test right now, when he's trying to choose his next VP candidate, is who is not going to exhibit the moral courage to take a stand on that day and certify an election when I'm trying to turn them over, trying to tell someone to overturn it. I mean, he is looking for a yes man. He's looking for someone to be in his shadow and not overshadow him. And I think that he's looking for someone that will go along with the demise of our democracy with whatever move he makes.
Van, I want to talk about President Biden and the ongoing protests that we're seeing at college campuses all across the country. He's set to deliver this keynote address at a ceremony commemorating the Holocaust next week. He's going to talk about anti-Semitism. What do you think the president's goal is going to be speaking at this event, considering all of these protests that have been ongoing, considering the fact that he's trying to strike this balance among younger voters who were part of the coalition that helped elect him in 2020, but also his steadfast support of Israel, but also fighting back against anti-Semitism. How does he do all of that?
Well, look, I hope he does a better job than he did earlier this week. I think he missed a real opportunity. He sounded like he was, trying to be on the one hand, on the other hand, and checking a box. I think that he needs to praise the good intentions of these young people. It is a righteous cause. If you don't want to see, innocent women and children and doctors and journalists killed, that's a righteous cause. And at the same time, you can be for a righteous cause, and the person standing right next to you can have sinister motives, sinister intentions, and sinister desires when it comes to Jewish people, when it comes to the state of Israel. And so I think he should praise the positive motivations of young people, but warn them. And I think what he hasn't done enough is to explain to people what Hamas is. I remember after 9/11, George W. Bush came forward. He explained what al-Qaeda was. I didn't like what he did afterwards, but he explained it. What is Hamas? What is the Islamic Republic of Iran? Not Iran, but Islamic Republic. What are they trying to do? What are their stated objectives? And you can support a righteous cause but still be used by people with sinister motives. He's got to clarify that. And then he's got to reassure Jewish Americans that we are not going to abandon them. I think that they see these protests and they see a lot of silence, an appalling level of silence from people. And the President of the United States needs to make sure that American Jews are comforted, that we hear their pain, we understand their frustration, and they're not going to be left alone, and that the president stands with them.
Yeah. Has it surprised you how much of a wedge this has driven through the Democratic Party? Is that an overstatement?
It hasn't surprised me because you have a younger generation that their main sympathies are with the Muslim community after 9/11, after Trump's Muslim ban. You got to remember, you got young people who are on these campuses. They weren't even born when Barack Obama gave his famous speech in 2004. They're very young people, and what all they know is that Muslims are vulnerable, and they're seeing these images, and so they're not read in on Hezbollah and the Houthis and Hamas and the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Taliban and that whole thing, and the precious importance of Israel, and the fact that there are 1 billion Chinese people, 1 billion Africans, 1 billion Indians, and only 15 million Jewish people left on planet Earth. Half of them live in Israel, and half of them are people of color. Nobody's told these young people that in strong enough terms. And so, of course, that door is left open for good people to step forward, but also for bad people to step forward and use those kids in sinister ways. And he's got to be a leader now and be very clear about what's good and what's bad about this movement.
All right. Olivia Troy and Van Jones, always great to see you both. Thanks so much for making time. Still ahead.